me, and they told me that I didn't have to be hungry or lonely. They told me also that there was a place for me to lay my head that wasn't like the places that I had been laying my head. And so they told me about a place in Cincinnati called the Drop-In Center. And the Drop-In Center was a shelter. It was really a room with 170 people in the room, and we all slept on wrestling mats about 6 inches away from each other. And so I always, when at the shelter, I always slept in the back because most nights I would cry myself to sleep because I was most likely to succeed, and I had succeeded in ending up in a homeless shelter. And every day we did the same thing. We got up and we went to work, most of us, and we went to work at temporary day labor places. And I remember I would get up at 4 o'clock and go to the day labor place, and I'd wait till about 7 o'clock and they'd give me an assignment, and then I'd drive an hour and a half to the assignment, and I'd work 9 hours because you didn't get paid for lunch, and then I'd drive an hour and a half back, and then I'd wait an hour to get my check, and at the end of the day, I wouldn't have enough money to afford a place to live, although I worked every day, because even if you're homeless, you still pay taxes. We also pay for transportation. We pay for safety equipment, although most of the time we didn't get any. And we pay for lunches, although some of the lunches were donated. And so at the end of the day, we didn't have enough money. And then we had to pay for our checks to get them cashed. And the worst thing about doing that was that I worked there for months, and they never ever remembered my name. They just called me whatever I had on that day. And that went on for a long time. But then one day, this guy walked up to me, and he started talking to me. And I realized that when he was talking to me, he was looking me right in the eye. And he talked for a long time. He talked for like 45 minutes. And I don't remember everything he said, but I do remember 4 words. He said, "I'm glad you're here." And that kind of touched me because no one had been glad I was there for a long time. And he also told me that although my disease is progressive, it's incurable, and it's fatal if not arrested, there's treatment for my disease. My disease is the disease of addiction. And so he told me that there was treatment for the disease of addiction right there at that shelter. And so I enrolled in the treatment program. It was a 6-month treatment program, and one component of the treatment program was community service. I'm going to stop for a second. I'm a little warm. You guys mind if I do this? So I started doing community service at a place called the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless, and I did community service there for 6 months. And so after 6 months doing community service there, they hired me as the outreach worker. And as the outreach worker, we did some pretty cool things. We created a street newspaper called Street Vibes. We created a radio show about homeless people called Street Vibes. We created a television show about homeless people called Street Vibes. We created a band for homeless people. You probably can't guess the band's name. We weren't very creative with names. I'm still warm, but I have on layers, so don't get hurt. So I did that, and then I did that as the outreach worker. I was the first formerly homeless outreach worker there, and for 2 years I was the outreach worker. Then after 2 years, they hired me as the director of the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless. I was the first formerly homeless director of the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless. And I looked around at all the programs in the city for homeless people, and one thing I realized is that there were no homeless people working at the programs. So we created a program called the Homeless Think Tank. And that was a program that if you wanted to start a program for homeless people in the city of Cincinnati, you had to use a homeless think tank. You had to have homeless people be involved in the planning process. And that actually became a model for the city of Cincinnati. If you wanted to do a program in the city of Cincinnati, you had to use the homeless think tank. And so after 2 years of doing that, they actually hired me as the director of the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless. I was actually the first formerly homeless, first African-American director of the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless. And the think tank and my advocacy actually got some attention for people in the state of Ohio, so I became a board member for the Ohio Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, COHIO. And then that think tank got some national recognition, so I actually became a board member for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And then after 2 years as a board member, I became the board president of the National Coalition for the Homeless, the first formerly homeless board president. And then 2 years after that, I became the first formerly homeless executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. And some really cool things happened to me. And I tell my story in costume because when I come in here, people have an impression of who I am. And that's what I looked like when I was on the street. But this is who I was underneath that clothing. And that's what happens with homeless people, that we are really people just like you, but we're in clothing that's been weathered by time, by misery. But on the outside, we're people just like you. And so I did some really cool things I got to do some cool things as the director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. I got to meet President Bill and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I got to have dinner at their home. I got to testify before the United States Congress on several occasions. I helped introduce legislation that, if enacted, would have ended homelessness in this country. And hopefully it'll be enacted one day, and we can truly end homelessness in this country. I was able to help plan the anniversary of the 40-year March on Washington. I got to hang out with the King family. I got to sit on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with Coretta Scott King in one of her last public appearances before she died. I got to meet some of the great civil rights legends of our time. I got to do some of the things I like to do creatively. As you see, I like to act. I've been able to act. I've been able actually to make a couple of movies. I've actually been able to make 4 movies. Don't mind that. That was a technical difficulty. So one of my movies back in 2000, I was able to win an Emmy. Things have been I just finished my first book. That's shameless self-promotion. You can get this on eBay. You can get it at any bookstore. Please buy one. But I tell my story that way because I want you to understand that homeless people are people just like you. And I know some of you are doing community service at shelters and soup kitchens, and you're working on Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week. And you probably have done community service for a long time, but one thing that you don't get from community service is tangible results. Well, tonight you do. Tonight you've seen the tangible results of community service. I left the coalition in 2004 as a director, and we have a really great director now. We have Michael Stoops, who's been there for a long, long time, who really is one of the most powerful people on this planet working on homeless issues. Today I do direct service, and I get the ultimate joy of watching people go from the streets to open the door of their own housing, and there's nothing more satisfying to me than that. Today, life has truly changed for me. But again, if you haven't seen the results of community service, we are. Community service really does work. If it wasn't for those people who reached out to me and Stephen and Joyce, we wouldn't be. And Jackie, I'm sorry, this is our first time speaking together, so please forgive me, Jackie. If it wasn't for those people, we wouldn't be here tonight. So be those people. Be the catalyst that takes somebody from being on the street to whatever they want to be. And I hope that if you don't remember anything else we've said, you remember Booker T. Washington's definition for success. Booker T. Washington said success should not be judged by one's station in life, but the obstacles they had to overcome to get there. And if no one else has told you today, I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much.